The fluorescent lights of Lincoln Elementary buzzed overhead as Margaret Chen stormed down the hallway, her designer heels clicking against the polished linoleum like gunshots. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched her phone, still warm from the heated conversation with her assistant about the board meeting she was now running late for. Everything in her world operated on precision: schedules, expectations, results. Everything except 8-year-old Tommy, who had apparently forgotten his scarf again. She rounded the corner toward his classroom and stopped dead in her tracks. There, crouched beside the small coat cubbies, was the school janitor, a weathered man in his 60s with calloused hands and a uniform that had seen better days. He was holding Tommy's scarf, the red wool one with the tiny dinosaurs that her son absolutely refused to leave home without, even in the unseasonably warm October weather. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice cut through the quiet hallway like a blade. "What exactly do you think you're doing with my son's belongings?" The janitor, whose name tag read Frank, looked up with startled eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he held the small scarf, and for a moment, Margaret noticed something she hadn't expected to see: tears threatening to spill over his weathered cheeks. "Ma'am, I was just," Frank began, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were just what? Going through children's personal items? Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is?" Margaret's voice rose, attracting the attention of a few teachers who peered out from their classrooms. She was in full corporate mode now, the same tone she used to dress down underperforming employees. "I should report this to the principal immediately." Frank's face crumpled slightly, but he stood up slowly, still clutching the scarf. "Please, ma'am, if you'd just let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you're going through my son's things." Margaret stepped closer, her anger building like steam in a kettle. "Tommy talks about you, you know. Says you're nice, and that you help him tie his shoes. Well, I'm putting a stop to that right now. He doesn't need help from." She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Frank's shoulders sagged, and he looked down at the scarf in his weathered hands. The hallway had grown quiet except for the persistent hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of children's laughter from the playground. "From someone like me," Frank finished quietly, no bitterness in his voice, only a profound sadness that made Margaret's stomach twist uncomfortably. For the first time, she really looked at him. Frank wasn't just any janitor, he moved with the careful precision of someone who took pride in his work. The hallway floors gleamed, the bulletin boards were perfectly aligned, and even the water fountain sparkled. This was a man who cared about details, who understood that small things mattered. "Ma'am," Frank said, his voice growing even quieter, "could I tell you something about this scarf?" Margaret crossed her arms, her impatience evident. "Make it quick, I have a meeting." Frank's eyes grew distant, as if he was looking at something only he could see. "Every morning, when Tommy gets off the bus, he adjusts this scarf just so. 3 little tugs, then he smooths it down. Same way, every single day." His voice cracked slightly. "He reminds me of my daddy." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to speak, but Frank continued, his weathered hands now shaking as he held the small piece of fabric. "My father passed when I was about Tommy's age. Had the same way of adjusting his work clothes before heading off to the factory. 3 little tugs, then smooth everything down. Said it was important to look presentable, even if you were just going to get dirty again." Frank's voice grew thick with emotion. "Lost him in an accident. Never got to tell him how much those little morning rituals meant to me." Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly, and she reached out to steady herself against the wall. "When I see Tommy do that same thing every morning," Frank continued, "it's like watching a little piece of my daddy come back to life. I know it sounds foolish, but an old man sometimes needs to believe in small miracles." He looked up at Margaret, his eyes now openly wet with tears. "I found this scarf on the playground during lunch. Thought maybe Tommy dropped it, didn't want him to be cold on the bus ride home. That's all I was doing, ma'am. Just trying to make sure one little boy didn't go home cold." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Margaret felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling, brick by brick. In her rush to protect her son, to maintain control over every aspect of his life, She had completely misjudged this gentleman whose only crime was caring about a child who reminded him of his lost father. "Frank," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry." He shook his head, extending the scarf toward her. "No need for apologies, ma'am. I understand. You're protecting your boy. That's what good mothers do." But Margaret didn't take the scarf. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She sat down on the small bench outside Tommy's classroom, suddenly feeling exhausted by the weight of her own assumptions. "Tell me more about your father," she said quietly. Frank's eyes widened in surprise, but he sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For the next 20 minutes, as the afternoon sun streamed through the hallway windows, Frank told Margaret about his father, a factory worker who had raised 5 children alone after Frank's mother died, who had taught his sons that dignity came not from what you did for work, but from how well you did it. "He used to say that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about," Frank concluded. "So you might as well be kind." Margaret felt tears she hadn't expected sliding down her cheeks. When had she become so suspicious, so quick to judge? When had protecting her son turned into assuming the worst about everyone around him? "Frank," she said finally, "would you mind if Tommy continued to talk with you? I think he could learn a lot from someone who knew his great-grandfather's generation." Frank's face lit up like sunrise. "It would be my honor, ma'am." When Tommy bounded down the hallway 15 minutes later, chattering about his science project, he stopped short at seeing his mother and Frank sitting together on the bench. "Mr. Frank, did you find my scarf?" Tommy asked, then performed his ritual, 3 little tugs, smooth it down, exactly as Frank had described. Margaret watched her son, seeing him with new eyes, understanding for the first time that the village it took to raise a child included janitors who noticed when scarves went missing and who carried the memory of their own fathers in their hearts. From that day forward, Margaret made a point of arriving early to pick up Tommy, not to rush him along, but to sit on that same bench and listen to Frank's stories about the importance of small kindnesses and the magic that happens when we choose to see the humanity in everyone we meet. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, wrapped in work uniforms and delivered with weathered hands that hold our children's forgotten treasures as if they were made of gold.